We're going to roll it forward again. Judaism has a rich tradition of both beliefs and practices associated with death and mourning. We have very strong beliefs. In some areas, it's this is what we teach, this is what we think, and that's it. There's not a lot of wiggle room. And in other areas, there's tremendous variety of opinion and opportunity for belief. For the most part, in the area of practices, ritual things that we do, Judaism is largely united. And in areas of belief when it comes to the meaning of life or the soul or the afterlife, that is strongly affected by the cultures we live in and by individual opinions. So what we're going to do first is, this morning we're going to do two sessions. The first session, then we'll take a break, is going to be on Jewish beliefs around the afterlife. So this is a theology session that we're going to be doing for the first half an hour, 45 minutes, something like that. Bring your questions at any time as we go. You may find some of the things that I'm going to say surprising. You say, I didn't think Judaism taught that. And other things you may say, it's missing. There's something that you believe is deeply Jewish that I'm not presenting. In either case, raise your hand, speak up, throw something at me, whatever you want to do to enter that into the conversation, because we want to make sure that everybody is getting the basis to form their own beliefs and understanding. What I can tell you is that a belief in the afterlife does help. First of all, it may be true. Second of all, it helps. When my stepfather was dying, he had a close friend who was a cynic when it comes to these matters, and they had a good enough relationship that even facing death, they were able to talk frankly. And this friend said to him, what difference does it make if someone believes in the afterlife? We die anyways. And my stepfather said to him, the difference is I'm dying optimistic.
Dying what?
I am dying optimistic. Well, that's what he said, was optimistic. It's a quote. All right, so that makes a difference, quite frankly. And I have seen as a rabbi many, many times where a person already has this belief structure where they are able to face their own dying, especially, sometimes the dying of another, but more especially their own dying, with more grace and with more calm and with more ability to relax and give and receive love in their final days and weeks if they hold this belief. People who don't hold this belief, I think that the likelihood of there being fear or terror in the end is higher. And so this is given to you as a gift, as an opportunity to not be afraid of the idea of death, although any particular dying, I can't speak to someone and say you have no right to be afraid. We're all afraid of dying. It's built into us. We should be afraid of dying in one sense because we want to live. And the value of life is paramount in Judaism. However, that said, there is a teaching, there are a variety of teachings about what else there is. So we're going to kind of look at that. Let's start by brainstorming a little. What do you think Judaism teaches about what happens to you after you die?
Your soul lives on. And usually it manifests itself more when you name, in the Ashkenazi tradition, when you name somebody for the person who died, and then that way you say these are the attributes, and hopefully you'll have them, but it keeps that person's memories alive too.
Okay, so you said two things and one ritual practice. So the first thing that Leslie said was you have a soul, and that soul somehow lives on, and we use the word live because we don't have another word for whatever that is. Second, she talked about memories and attributes that you embodied, continuing to live in others after you are gone, and thereby those things are embodied in those people. And then third, there's a ritual practice of placing your name on a baby, and that baby carries your name forward as a symbol or a direct hope that your memory, and in some sense, the fact that you lived, will be part of life moving forward. Okay? Anyone offended by any of those teachings? So
One of them, it's not my belief.
now we've brought in, others believe. Now we've brought in another belief, which is radically different from what Leslie just said. It may or may not be complementary. The two could live together, or maybe they're in conflict. We'll work that out. And that's the belief of a Messiah. So there is this teaching that a Messiah will, what did you say? Come. That's one word.
Will raise up to one of them where.
So the Messiah will raise up everybody. What does that mean?
I don't know if there's another second life, another life. I'm not
You mean the
sure.
dead people? The dead people. All right, so people who are dead, when the Messiah comes, this is something that you may have heard people say, dead people will live again, and then the verb she used was raise up to I don't know what. What are the possibilities that we can fill in that blank of I don't know what? Things people teach about the afterlife when it comes to this idea of the Messiah. Notice I'm not weighing in on any of these yet. I'm simply processing the information I'm being given, okay? All right, so a Messiah comes, and those who are dead will be raised up to what?
Heaven.
Okay, heaven is a possibility. What is heaven?
Peace. They should be in peace when they die. That's why I was always told.
All right, so now hang on a minute. So you say when people die, they should be in peace in heaven. Okay?
Yeah.
She's saying when a Messiah comes, people will be raised up from being dead. Okay? Are those the same teachings? That when you die, you'll have peace in heaven, or when a Messiah comes, people will be raised up from the dead?
I don't know.
I don't know is a good answer. You're in the right place. All right, what else? Yes, Joel?
I believe that the soul never dies, and that it eventually is returned to earth in another person somewhere down the line.
Okay, so Joel says the soul never, ever dies, but the soul may actually be part of another bodily life. So you have it now. Sometime down the road, do you get it again, or someone
No,
else?
somebody
Or a
else
dog,
gets it.
or a cat, or a
Somebody else gets the soul, a human.
A human. Dolphins don't cut it.
Those are animals, I don't know about that.
Okay, so there's a belief that some people articulate that the soul, and this is called Gilgulei Neshamot, the reincarnation of souls. To reincarnate means something becomes incarnate, which means it becomes incarnate, which is Latin for in the flesh. Carne means, if you know Spanish, that's meat, right? So the Latin root carne is flesh. So incarnation is putting something in the flesh. So people who believe in reincarnation believe that A, the soul was once in the flesh, and B, will once again be in the flesh. How many times?
Don't know.
Okay, we have billions of people now. Where did the souls come from? If there's more people alive now than
That's a question I thought about.
So you have to have some kind of a factory that produces new souls, and then you have some kind of a mechanism by which those souls come back into bodies. If the world's population ever goes down, and there's too many souls for the bodies, what do we do? Okay, so these are the kinds of fun questions we have when we start trying to come up with specific questions about things that have never happened. Okay? We're going to keep going on beliefs, but we're introducing the idea now that certainty is very difficult in these things because it hasn't happened yet. And I, for one, am not eager to find out the answer to what happens to me after death. Right? I believe we're all going to get their answer. And I hope none of you are eager to get the answer, because that would mean dying sooner than later, and we don't want that. Yes, otherwise. Yes,
This has got nothing to do with this. When a person dies
yes.
and they never get a name, what happens to those people? Nobody knows. I was told as a kid they were separated. The one that never got a name was in one side, no, seriously, and the one that got a name was in the other side.
Okay.
You know, and
So-
this is the way they lived.
Okay.
They lived again, and whoever was born got the name, and they lived on and on. And my father always told me, when you have a child, and you give the child the second name after somebody, that never counts. The first name counts. This is my father told this story.
Okay.
And he, well,
Well, let's do this, because this is what I would call a folk tradition. A folk tradition is something not found in any of the literature, but people believe it, right? So you have a folk tradition that the giving of a name has a real power, that the name is what gives you what we would call theologically perdurance or endurance in an ongoing way. So that the name is what attaches to the soul the power of surviving death, right? And that somehow in the world to come, that those who are nameless, who is nameless? In the pre-medical era, it was infants who died young, who died in the first 30 days. And so it was a very, very common thing that a sick child would be born. And if this has happened in people's personal lives, I'm sorry if I hit a soft topic here, we'll move past it soon. But if there's an infant death, that infant traditionally was not named until they had lived 30 days. And you'll go to the cemeteries, particularly the older Jewish cemeteries, and you will see off to the side in the cemetery small markers that might just say baby, or might just say boy, or might just say like baby Schwartz, or something like that, without a name, and it may or may not have dates. Lived 7 days or something like that, usually not. And they're off to the side in the cemetery. Why are they off to the side in the cemetery? There's a theological reason and a practical reason. The theological reason is this idea that is the soul really in the person if they haven't really lived, right? And so while Judaism teaches that life begins with first breath, full human life begins with first breath, there is yet this ambivalence that after 30 days, if the child dies in the first 30 days, traditionally you don't sit Shiva. Okay? In the first 30 days you don't sit Shiva. Why? Because it was a common thing. Death after birth was a common thing. Birth is a dangerous experience for the woman and the child, and before medicine, anything could happen. Now, it's a different thing in our world, so we have changed a lot of that. We'll talk about it when we do Shiva at the beginning of the second hour today. But attaching the name to a person is part of giving them permanence. Leslie had a parallel version of that, where she talked about the values of the person and their attributes being permanently handed over to the next person, and the family sees those attributes as something we wish upon this next child, and that child becomes the carrier, the trusted guardian of those values. Okay, so let's all take a moment and turn off the sound on all our phones, since multiple phones are going on. Mine was also on. I just didn't get wrong. Yes? Let me just finish that. And I think that what's happening in your family is the idea of separating the child in the cemetery is being seen as separated in the world to come. I don't see a basis for that in the literature, for separation in the world to come for an unnamed child. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think we're talking about the cemetery.
okay.
Yep. And the practical reason is you don't use a full grave on a grave that's this big. So you bury to the side, because why would you use a 6-foot by 3-foot grave for a coffin this large?
Boy would be named.
If the boy is sick, there's no bris. And the boy is named at the bris. So if the baby boy is sick and fragile, you would not do the surgery of the bris on him until he's healthy. If he's never healthy, and God forbid he dies, then he never got a name.
I want this question. I understand this. If a person died, your parent, and was never named because the children didn't have children.
An adult?
Yeah, an adult. And if the other child, and another child, if the other child was named after one person and was big, they're like 20 years old, could they, at 20, get a name from the other person? You know what I mean? You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes, but we're getting off topic here.
Well, can you answer me about this?
I can. Anybody can have any name at any time.
Yeah.
It's a custom that we name in Ashkenazi culture after someone who has died,
Yeah.
and someone who has died well.
Uh-huh.
Someone who has died in an unseemly manner, we wouldn't pass that name on traditionally because it would look like the bad luck associated with that would be carrying forward. So that's another reason not to give a name to an infant that's very sick, because then you're losing the name from the family history if that child dies. If someone's 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 and 60, 70, they've never had a name, we can give them a name.
Well, no, they have a name for one person.
Yes.
But the second person, they don't have it. You know, who you wanted to, you couldn't give a name. There was nobody to give the name to. They didn't have children.
I understand. Somebody was born,
Okay.
the person was
So
still...
the person that's grown, could they have a Hebrew name later in life? That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
So how do you do that? Go to the rabbi?
There's a ceremony called Shinui Hashem, the change of a name or the giving of a name, and we can do that. It's usually done when someone is sick. Your name is Moshe, you get really sick, we want to call you Moshe Chaim. So life is in your name, and we can say prayers for healing for you, that kind of thing. But yes, we can add names later on. But let me get back to...
You have to have the consent of
I
the
need
person to do that.
I need to get
You
back to...
can't do it as a grandparent.
I need to get back to the lesson I'm teaching.
Yeah, don't
Okay?
take over the
That's good.
Excuse me.
We'll talk. Why don't you talk to me during the week, give me a call. We'll go through what it is, because obviously there's a family history here, and I need to know more. Okay? All right, so, beliefs about the afterlife. So we have a spiritual afterlife, we have dead people being raised up after they're dead, and we have Messiah, and we have reincarnation of the soul that's been thrown in here as well. Any other beliefs of the afterlife that you have heard or think about? Yes?
Go back to when my father-in-law died, and we were driving over to my mother-in-law's house, and I had my 4.5-year-old was in the car, and he said, we told him Grandpa died. He said, well, what's going to happen to him? So I said, well, we're not going to see him anymore, 4.5, and we're not going to visit him anymore, but we can always remember him.
Yep.
And that's how I look at it. I'm sort of don't know about an afterlife, yes or no, but I know. I mean, I think of my mother almost every day.
Right. So Phyllis, we have a difference between what we know and what we believe. By definition in religion, belief is something that can't be proven to you. Otherwise, it's called knowledge. Right? So we know people die, and we know we can remember them, and we know that we can emulate their attributes and qualities, and we know that we can name for them and pass those things on. These are not matters of belief. We know these things. Now, belief is what we don't know. Right? And then how are we going to believe or not believe something? And in religion, we are often given information that cannot be proven to you. And that's the essential act of religion, is to give you things that transcend knowledge and enter the world of belief. And yet, in Judaism, belief has to be reasonable. I'm not going to believe that we all turn into pink elephants who fly through the 5th dimension. That's not a reasonable belief. It is no more provable than a spiritual afterlife that goes on forever. I can't prove that either, because I'm not there. And as I said, I'm not eager to be there to say, see, I told you so. Right? But we have in our tradition things that we are given by traditional Judaism as an opportunity to believe. And you, without your mind getting in the way of fact-checking too much, you can look at these things and say, these are things that I've been offered to believe. These are things that have been taught in this tradition for thousands of years. And honestly, this tradition has earned the benefit of the doubt on a lot of stuff. This tradition has survived when other traditions haven't. This people has managed to find meaning in life in the darkest of times. We have managed to give to the world incredible things. This tradition has earned a lot of benefit of the doubt in its 3,000-year journey through human history. So, put the skepticism aside for a little bit, open the mind to just study the different ideas, and then figure out if any of them seem to fit what makes sense to you. So we're going to look at places where you don't even know you've been taught Jewish teachings of the afterlife. Let's pass the Sidurim around. We're going to start in our prayer book. I think I'm one short here. Can we pass up one of those blue books that's not being used? Okay. So we're going to look at some prayers that have to do with death and have to do with the afterlife, and we'll see if they mean what you think they mean. Okay? So let's start with the Amidah. First and foremost, if you turn to page 115b, this is a prayer. I have the Shabbat holiday prayer book in front of you, which has an Amidah that is shorter than the weekday Amidah, but the paragraph I'm looking for is here, so we can use this one. And the paragraph I'm looking for is the one that begins, Mechalkel Chaim B'Chesed. Now, the problem is, if you don't know Hebrew fluently, you know this paragraph. And so we're torn in Judaism when we pray, because we learn how to say and sing prayers, and when we learn how to pronounce the words and sing them, we feel like we've really gotten there. Like, now I can participate in synagogue, and I have the experience of communal prayer. And we all go, Mechalkel Chaim B'Chesed, Mechayei Meitim B'Rachamim Rabbi, Somech Noflim. What does it mean? What does it mean? Okay? So this is, I hate to do this to you, because this is one of those moments where if you've come to shul, you've gotten to a measure of comfort, and now I'm going to make you uncomfortable, because sometimes learning the song is a block to knowing what you're saying. And you might be saying something that you believe in, you might be saying something you don't believe in, you might be saying something that actually, if you look at it, you have no idea what it means. And a challenge question to you is, can prayer be made up of words that don't mean anything to you? Is that prayer? Can you be praying things that don't mean anything to you?
It's done in religion all the time.
All the time, but does that make it right? So we have this thing in non-Hebrew speaking Jewish communities where we are training people to say syllables and to learn music and to experience a communal moment. And somehow that has the affect of being prayerful. And then there are moments when the leadership stops and you're given silent time. And that's when most people go into what I would call genuine prayer. Either you're reading the words in English, or the language of your understanding, or you stop reading the words and you go into your heart and mind and you're doing genuine prayer. Right? In other words, articulating within your own being ideas, feelings, hopes, thoughts, requests, petitions, gratitude, fear, wonder, vulnerability, hope, all those things towards a source of life and power and potential that is related to those things and maybe can give you those things. God. Right? That's prayer. Reading words and sing-song and happy-clappy stuff is communal experience, which it can be meaningful and prayerful and spiritual, but it's not the same thing as, I'm worried about my grandmother. Please take care of my grandchildren. Oh God, I hope it's not cancer. You know, those are prayers, right? That's right where you are, and it's nobody else's idea, and nobody else's words, and nobody else's experience. It's you on the line with the source of life. That's prayer. So when we go, Mechakel Chaim B'Chesed, I love it too. I bump the beam, I tap my foot, I have a good time. I also know what the words mean. Right? And there are lots of prayers in the Siddur that I have to say, you know, they came into the Siddur late, they're not from the Torah. There's a bunch of stuff that came in from Kabbalah that I read the words and I go, oh, I can't believe I'm singing this again. but I like the song, you know, Anim Zmirot. So the kids come up and they stand and they sing, and I'm so proud of them, and we teach it to them. But if you actually look at the words, it's a whole bunch of mystical stuff that I'm like, that's not me. But okay, so let's look at this one. Let's look at this one. Yes, Lon?
Just one short thing. For the years that I've been going to Evening Minute, even though I don't know the exact meaning of all the words, I thought of it over the years, company, because it's like a group meditation.
Yes.
Right?
Okay, so a meditation. Some Eastern religions have prayer with nonsense syllables, right? Om. And that's not to make fun of it. It's I'm being very sincere. using syllables that are not linguistic in that sense is a way to give the human an experience of sounding and articulating without letting your culture and your language get in the way of your essential soul and your being. That's what mantras are. So there's a lot that's been studied about whether or not in non-Hebrew speaking Jewish communities, Hebrew prayer is a mantra. Right? Does it fulfill that role? And there's a lot to be said for that, although we want it to be happy-clappy, and most mantra traditions are very meditative. Right? I mean, Anim Spira, that's not really yogic. You know? Okay, so let's look at this paragraph. Mechalkel Chaim b'chesed, and the Hebrew and the English unfortunately don't match very well. Your love sustains the living. Mechalkel is from the word kol, which means everything, in a doubled form. So it's you give everything to the living, Chaim, everything that's alive, b'chesed, with love or mercy, compassion. So you give everything to the living in compassion. Very nice. Second phrase, mechaye metim berachamim rabim. You give chayim, mechaye, from chai, you give life to the metim, the dead. Berachamim rabim, with great mercy. Forget the rest of the paragraph. That's enough to go on for the rest of this class. You give the living everything, and you give life to the dead. Was ist das, life to the dead? Yeah?
I'd like to add that I belong to the Reformed Synagogue, and they left that out.
Yes, this is a paragraph or a line that the classical Reform took out of their prayer books and now are putting back in. The more recent Reform prayer books put this back in. The classical Reform also took out the middle paragraph of the Shema. They're putting it back in. Reform has found a way to make metaphor out of tradition, to safeguard traditional formulations without losing them completely. That move in the Reform movement is very interesting. It didn't come without conflict. There was conflict. But over the last 20, 30 years, there has been a move in Reform to find metaphor and tradition and thereby keep tradition. Right? So that's what they've done here. So what is Mechaye Hametim? Let's start with a literal interpretation. You give life to dead people. What does it mean?
Bring the dead back to life.
Okay, so one interpretation is, now you're dead, now you're not. What does that look like? Is it a zombie apocalypse? It's not a zombie apocalypse. However, in classical rabbinic understanding, this is resurrection of the dead. This is resurrection of the dead. The people who wrote this prayer and put it down in the list of prayers that we should be saying every day, 2,000 years ago, were the rabbis of ancient Israel after the destruction of this second temple. And they wrote the Mishnah, the basic book of Judaism, which became the source of study for the Talmud, which became all Judaism that we know today. Those rabbis believed very firmly in resurrection of the dead. To wit, I read you Mishnah Sanhedrin 10:1. All Jews have a share in the Olam Haba, the world to come. As it says in Isaiah, your people, God, are all righteous. They shall inherit the land forever, the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I may be glorified. That's quite a claim. So the rabbis of the Mishnah said, all Jews have a share of the world to come, and what proof text did they use? One that says that we shall inherit forever the land. Doesn't sound very spiritual. Sounds pretty physical. Right? They meant it. Physically. So what does that mean? Go ahead. I see the trouble on your face. Bring it up.
It doesn't make sense.
Good. So it doesn't make sense. So again, it's not a matter of knowledge, it's a matter of belief. Everything that makes total sense and can be proven to your scientific mind is knowledge. And we have a bracha in the Amidah for God who gives knowledge. The bracha right after the Kedusha, you have given man knowledge and given him understanding. Blessed be the Lord our God who gives man knowledge. That's knowledge. This is not knowledge. This is belief. So what are they saying? Let's tease it out. What does it look like? Let's be literal.
Should be context, as it's kind of a rallying cry, because they were losing at the time.
Understood, but tell me what it says first, before we understand them historically or anything else. What does this say? What does it look like? What is this? I'll read on. Then it says, after all Israel has a share of the world to come, it says, however, these are the ones who don't have a share of the world to come. One who says that the resurrection of the dead is not in the Torah. That the resurrection of the dead is not in the Torah. Okay, so they're saying a basic teaching of their form of Judaism is belief in the resurrection of the dead, to the point that if you reject that that teaching is in the Torah, because obviously it's in the Torah, you have to believe it from their point of view. If you don't say it's in the Torah, let's say you believe it, but it's not in the Torah, you're out. They say you don't get a piece of it. That's pretty harsh. This is a very important teaching to them. They've raised the stakes to here. You lose your place in the world to come if you don't believe in it and believe it's from the Torah. That's what they say.
Where is it in the Torah?
It's not. Otherwise they wouldn't have to make such a big deal out of it. They could just quote a verse. What verse did they quote? Isaiah. The reason they didn't quote Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, or Deuteronomy is because it's not in there. Moses doesn't talk about an afterlife. Moses never says very clearly, do the mitzvot and you will get into the world to come. If you kill somebody, you will be executed and lose your place in the world to come. He never says that. Never. It's not his topic. His topic is this life. How do you live? What are the mitzvot? And he doesn't deal with anything after. Later books of our Bible, the Nevi'im, the prophets, and the Ketuvim, the writings, do have places that deal with this topic. Job rejects the idea completely. It says very clearly, those who sleep in the dust cannot praise you. Psalms in Hallel, Lo hametim hallelujah. If you know the words of Hallel well, it's another sing-song. We sing our way through it. But the line says, the dead shall not praise you. What does that mean? Does that mean that they're incapable of praising you because they're dead? Or does it mean dead people in the world to come don't need to praise? It seems to say that dead people don't praise. However, we have in the book of Daniel, one of the last books of the Tanakh, from the time of the return from Babylonia back to rebuild the Second Temple. This is 600 years after Moses. Daniel says very clearly, there will come a time when those who sleep in the dust will rise again, some to a life of eternal bliss and others to eternal torment. Period. End of sentence. That's it. One clear line from one prophet at the very end of the Tanakh. Okay, guess what? That's a line from a prophet. Doesn't matter that it's only said once. It was said. Therefore, it's in the Tanakh, even though it's not in the Torah. But since it's in the Tanakh, then you have to go back and say, well, if that's a basic teaching about something as big as the afterlife, surely Moses must have known it, and then they go back and they find places where Moses says things like, Uvacharta b'chaim, or V'nikrita nefshahim me'amecha. I think you changed the tune. Okay. Very well. So, when it says that soul shall be cut off from your people, in its context without Daniel, you would think that that just means excommunication or death penalty or something like that. But since you have Daniel, who has this teaching about resurrection of the dead, you shall come out of your grave and live eternally in bliss or torment. And he doesn't say on what basis. Presumably a God of justice is making judgments there where good people get the good stuff and bad people get the bad stuff, but Daniel doesn't say it. Could be a random lottery. Right? Then you go back and you read it into the Torah. So that's what the rabbis did. The foundational rabbis of Judaism had a lot in common with all the other Judaisms of the Second Temple. and they had a couple things that were unique to them that made them who they were. Belief in the resurrection of the dead was one of the basic teachings that made the rabbis the rabbis. It's what made the rabbis not the Essenes. It's what made the rabbis not the Sadducees. It's what made the rabbis not the Zealots. It made the rabbis not the Samaritans. It's what made the rabbis the rabbis. Everybody else loses the battle for history. The rabbis are the only ones who survived the 2nd and 3rd century intact with a literature called the Mishnah. They write their basic teachings down in it, and off it goes into the Talmud and Judaism in the world, and here we are today, having inherited their core teaching. So one of their core teachings is you get to leave the grave, and you get to live again physically. I don't know. Do you want your 20-year-old body, your 30-year-old body, your 40? Which body do you want?
My body was better 30 than 20.
Right? Do you want your body before you lose your arm in the war, or after because it was an important event to you? Maimonides goes into this in his Guide to the Perplexed, and he says, once you get past the barrier between now and then, you can't talk about what it's going to be. All we know is Daniel said you get it. And you should act accordingly. And how it's going to be and when it's going to be is contrary to the natural world that God has given us. And the only thing you and I can know, knowledge, is the natural world that God has given us. So if you're going to try and use your tools of reason and logic and scientific thought to try and make sense of resurrection of the dead, you are spinning your mind like a gerbil in a wheel. You're getting nowhere. You have no basis for figuring that out. So stop it. That's what he says. Yes?
So the thought that comes to me is that maybe what the rabbis were saying is that in order to, if you believe that God, in God's greatness, then you can believe that God creates miracles. And the greatest miracle to me would be resurrection, right?
Absolutely.
So maybe that was a way, or maybe a metaphor, or some way to express that if you truly, truly believe in God, you can truly believe in miracles. And
yes, and Maimonides uses that language, even though he is a scientific rationalist. He says this is an example of a miracle that breaks the laws of nature in a moment, and then the laws of nature continue unchanged. So those who deserve it get resurrection of the dead and live. But if nature is normal after that moment, what happens? You can die again. You can get sick. You can get cancer. You can get hit by a bus. And it's just life again. So if you're going to say that it's life and you get to live for a millennium without having to eat or drink and everything is happy and you never have a cough and, you know, that kind of stuff, well, the truth of the matter is, for Maimonides, he says, that doesn't make sense.
Impossible.
Well, resurrection is impossible. So if you've got a God who can break the rules in a moment, the question is, would he break all the rules and reconstruct reality? And Maimonides says that if you take a complete reconstruction of reality, which is what it would take, human beings don't die anymore, right? Well, that's a completely different fabric of the universe than what we're living in. And the truth of the matter is, you as an immortal body are not the same person as you in a mortal body. Me in this body is tied up with the fact that I can get hurt, and I can get sick, and I can die. That's who I am. If I'm like Thor, and I'm all living and all strong and all healthy, I'm not Rabbi Tobin anymore. I'm essentially not me. I'm the guy with the bad back, right? And the allergies. That's a big piece of who I am. So if I'm resurrected as something other than that, am I really being resurrected? I'm not. So for Maimonides, if it's going to be you that's coming back, it's going to be you that's coming back. And you better take care of yourself. It's like George Burns, if I'd known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. Well, the second time around, you know what's coming. Guess what? You're going to get pancreatic cancer when you're 45.
You start off with birth again?
Be right. I don't know. Maybe you come back at 45. Those are the things he says you don't know. You can't know. Right? I mean, if everyone comes back as a baby, who's going to feed them? Maybe the poor people who are still alive at the time of the resurrection, that one generation will instantly be turned into caregivers for the billions.
Is it one resurrection? I mean, it's gonna happen constantly.
Okay, so Maimonides says it's a one-time event, but we don't know. Now, what some people do that Maimonides rejects completely is they take Messiah, and we heard a little bit of this, resurrection of the dead, and the eternal life of the world to come, and they combine all three of those things, and they say a Messiah will come, and the resurrected dead will live, and everyone will live forever in a world to come. People putting all of that together have followed Christianity. That is not originally a Jewish teaching. That is what Christianity did with three very popular beliefs at the time of Jesus. Jesus' followers conflated the popular things in the life and spirituality section of the Walden Books store at that time. And they took the most popular teachings and they put them all together and they made that what Jesus stands for. Right? That's the construction of the theology of the afterlife of the church. Messiah comes, dead are resurrected, everyone lives forever. That's not the essential Jewish teaching. Each one of those exists within Judaism, but some are held by different people and some by conflicting schools of thought, as we see in Mishnah Sanhedrin. There are some people who don't believe the resurrection, but they might believe in Messiah. They might believe in the world to come without resurrection, which would be the eternity of the soul. Okay, let's take questions around this way.
I'm glad you brought up Jesus.
Well, that's my job.
I wondered about that guy. Some years ago, I took a course in Pirkei Avot.
Yeah.
And the opening question was, what was happening in the world a little over 2,000 years ago?
When Pirkei Avot was written. Yeah.
Excuse me? what?
Yeah, when Pirkei Avot was written in the Mishnah.
Okay, so,
Pirkei Avot is in the Mishnah.
so I said, Jesus, right? And so the teacher said, and they believe that there's a place, afterlife, everyone will be risen. And she said, that is how we get the idea of there is a place for everyone in the world to come. That was a counter, an answer to the people who were going over to Christianity, because the promise of life after death was wonderful. And so the Jews came out and said, we have that too.
I think that is not historically correct, the way that is being described to you. That Christianity was teaching that only some people are getting into the world to come, and if you want to be one of them, you've got to punch your ticket with us on the bus by accepting Jesus as your Savior and so forth. And that our teaching is a reaction to that, saying, no, every Jew who stays Jewish gets to be in the world to come, and therefore you shouldn't become non-Jewish in that way. I don't think historically that's correct. It's a simplistic action-reaction. I think that our teachings about the world to come in the Pharisaic movement predate Jesus, because most of Jesus' teachings, and I should teach a course someday about Judaism in the New Testament. That would be an interesting adult course. Okay, so I'll put that on the calendar. I'll do the Judaism of the New Testament. But if you look in the book of Matthew, their first book, for example, it's got a very famous thing called a Sermon on the Mount, where he teaches a bunch of stuff. And most of it is a direct rebuttal of Hillel and Shammai.
And the Beatitudes.
Yeah, it's the Mount of the Beatitudes, right. So he knew what Hillel and Shammai were teaching, and he was reacting to them. He quotes Torah and then rejects it repeatedly in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, you have been told this, but I tell you this. And the this in the first quote is Moses. Right? So it's not like, there's any way to put these two things together. He was a revolutionary, and he was critical of the Torah of Moses, and he was critical of the schools of Hillel and Shammai and how they were reading halakha. He does it in divorce, for example. Hillel and Shammai have a very famous argument about whether or not a man needs to have a reason to divorce his wife, or whether he can just divorce her. And Jesus comes in and says, divorce, if you divorce somebody, you commit adultery. And you make her commit adultery when she marries a new man. There is no divorce. Well, that's contrary to the Torah and Hillel and Shammai. He's engaged in the debate of the day on the streets. That's what's going on. Okay, so life in the world to come, for the rabbis, was at the very least resurrection of the dead. Did the rabbis believe in a spiritual afterlife? a soul that lives forever? Maybe not. Maybe all they believed in was a physical afterlife in a time of resurrection. Yes?
You know, relevant to what you just said, they're two completely disparate things. One is that there's resurrection of the physical body, and then I'm wondering, maybe the physical body stays dead, and maybe it's the soul that's resurrected, and then I started to think, maybe it's resurrected in a different way. In other words, in a living person, I can take things from the soul of my mother, my father, all the good things that can still live within me. So even though the original soul, the original physical being is gone, some of the things from their soul are living in me, the good things.
Yes. So the medieval philosophers, when they developed the theology of the soul, which really comes in fairly late to Judaism, a lot of that is happening in the Aristotelian school of thought, which begins around the 11th century and moves on for a few hundred years. That's where the development of the theory of the soul really becomes a core Jewish belief. Most of those people say that it is your experiences and the knowledge conclusions that you draw from your life experiences that add up to what your soul is in its fulfillment. So my soul starts as a blank canvas, as does yours, but over time it gains images and ideas and experiences as a result of my lived life, and inasmuch as those experiences are part of divinity, where they are true, where they are love, where they are true religion and faith and belief, those things are the colors that stay on the canvas. And so my canvas at the end of my life will look different from yours. And ultimately, we can only paint with the colors of God's complete picture of truth, and we each only gain pieces of that truth. But those are still permanent, real things that we have acquired. And only through the acquisition of those things does our soul have the ability to be enduring, because those are permanent things that our soul has become. And that is forever. And in that sense, those things that are our soul are, after our death, with God, because those truths are already with God. And so we live forever, and we have a uniqueness in that our own patterning of those things was unique to us, but we're part of a bigger picture. So that becomes the Aristotelian theory of the soul. It's called the acquired intellect. That's what that is. But it's non-physical. And so resurrection of the dead is something different from that. And so Maimonides makes resurrection of the dead something that happens. But the soul is the real deal. And the only reason he makes it something that happens is because he's got a prophet who says it. If he could get rid of that line in Daniel, he would get rid of it in a heartbeat. Because he's a very intellectual guy, and this theory of the soul is much more compatible to rational intellectual people. Because we could say it's non-physical because we know knowledge. I know what happens to the body. We could go exhume a body out of the cemetery, and I can show you what happens to a body. That happens to every single body. So we know those bodies are in no shape to be living again. Right? So we have this other concept that the world to come must be spiritual and non-physical. Okay? Yes?
Part of how I understand, and this may be just very, very specific to me, part of how I understand the idea about resurrection, it's more of a spiritual thing. I think about the idea, one of the ideas I understand about our religion is that life is sacred and precious, and part of what makes it so precious is none of us know how much time we have.
Correct. Absolutely.
And it's part of what makes our life meaningful, that it's a series of choices, and these choices have consequences.
And we don't know, well,
And we don't know what
we don't know what the effects of our choices are.
We don't always know. Exactly. And once we physically die, it's all theory about what happens, because none of us are around.
Well, hang on there. Hold on there, Pilgrim. There's a difference between saying it's all theory
My belief is
and
that-
saying it's something real, and we don't have the tools to know for sure what it is. Because the problem is that religion is talking about things that are either real or they aren't. So you don't get to say, God is whatever you want God to be. That's false. God is what God is. Maybe you can only connect to it in the way that you can or you want or whatever, but with or without you, God either is or isn't. And if God is something with or without your pea brain figuring out what it is. We're little and limited and not able to really encompass something like that. But that doesn't affect the reality that is or isn't God. The same thing is in the world to come. After we die, there is either something or not. And the something is something. So we don't, the fact that we get to sit around and go, I think it's this, and I think it's this, and you think it's that, and we all think it's that, and isn't it great that we all have these beliefs? Well, all but one of us is going to be wrong. Only one thing can be right because it is something or it isn't. So of all the things that I've said to you this morning, 99% of them are wrong. And 1% of them is right. And we don't know which.
Well, that's my point. We don't know.
Right, but that doesn't mean it's all theory.
Okay. Well,
The stakes are high here, folks. And this is where people start to think it sounds like a Christian Bible reader or something like that. Your eternity is at stake in this conversation. Your life in the world to come is at stake. Whether or not you have an eternity in front of you is what we're talking about. And then the next question is that eternity something that you can forfeit? Are there things that we have to do to earn it? Or are we given it and we can lose it? Or do you get it no matter what, say, might as well, pillage and kill?
but part two of that is from a different perspective. For example, was that was talking about that, about a memory from before, does it get passed on? I was named from one of my grandmother's sister's family, whose Hebrew name is Frum. And I remember, and I told you this before, how whenever my grandmother would talk of, my grandmother was one of 11, and Fanny was the eldest. And she was the caretaker, and the extra mom, and the go-to person in the entire family. And I definitely am those things in my family. I'm the most spiritual, I'm the biggest caretaker, I'm the one, anybody needs anything, call Francesca, she'll be there in 5 minutes. And then I had my father, who was a physician who everyone adored, and he was such a wonderful caretaker. He was mostly specialized in cancer work. He was a thoracic surgeon. And I modeled myself so much about trying to be as wonderful a healer as he was with his patients. And in those ways, they live on in me.
I wouldn't argue with anything that you're saying. But the question is, how do they live on without you?
I don't know, but it's
If it's only what they've managed to pass on to us, then what are you going to say to the 2-month-old who died? He never learned to talk or teach or raise or influence, and maybe the family didn't want to pass on the name because they died so young they thought it would be a curse. And is that life not as meaningful, as real, as human, as sacred as the person who lived to be 80 and had 100 great-grandchildren and taught them all how to be moral, ethical people and inspired a generation? Is there a qualitative difference for the soul of one and the soul of the other? Now, Maimonides has no problem saying there's a qualitative difference. This soul has accrued more color on the canvas. And this soul is white. Now, white gets into heaven. If you mess it up, you're out. You can paint a bad picture. Right? So he's going to have the world to come for that soul, but he's not going to have the same quality, judgment, value of life associated with that. And of course his view is the philosopher prophet is the highest level of human, right? And the people who can never figure out, an olive from a bet, that's why we have Torah stories about talking donkeys. That's for them. Right? We have philosophy for the people who can achieve it. Yes?
How in a family when you have a few children, a mother, a few children, and they all have a different personality? you raised all the children. No, seriously.
No, that's what God
Say,
does. We all
more or
have,
less, you
because
try
they have their own
both,
experience.
And yet, one would be kind, one is nasty,
Well,
one
they
is
have-
very smart. I
But
mean,
they all have
why
different
does that
experiences.
happen?
The painting becomes different
Huh?
because the painting is different because they have different experiences. You may be a very good person. You're not having an experience of you. I'm having an experience of you. You don't have an experience of you in your life. So even though 4 people are raised in the same home, they're not raised in the same home. Ezra is in a home where the siblings are Maya, Yossi, and Avi. Maya is in a home where the siblings are not Maya, Yossi, and Avi. The siblings are Yossi, Ezra, and Avi. That's a different home. Her experience is different than Ezra's experience. So every home is raising children who are not growing up in the same home.
It's a very
These
interesting
seven are
analogy.
identical twins.
I never
and
thought of
They
that.
have different personalities.
And the time is different when they're born.
Yeah.
Right. So their experiences and the accrued value of their soul, the things that they get, are going to be different. Even if you send them to the same camp and the same school and they're going to be different. Plus, they are naturally different.
That's separate difference.
People are born with physical differences. I'm taller, you're shorter, I can jump, you can sing, I'm good at math, you like art. Whatever it is, we're born with natural abilities that are also very different that make it easier to acquire certain kinds of divinity. Some people can acquire divinity through prayer and thought. Other people acquire divinity through justice and compassion. People have natural abilities that will acquire pieces of divinity better. Let's go on to the next one. I want you to turn to page 194. You should recognize this if you've ever been in a Yizkor service. So we come to synagogue on the last day of our 4 major holidays. Rosh Hashanah is not in this count. Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Passover, and Shavuot. And on the last day of each of those holidays, we say Yizkor. 4 times a year we say Yizkor. And you will also come on the anniversary of the death of a loved one, and you may also say something like a Yizkor paragraph on that day. What is Yizkor? Just on 194, these are only changed for singular, plural, male, or female. Yizkor Elohim Nishmat, and let's say the brother, Nishmat Achi Ha'ahuv Shehalach Le'olamo. God will remember the soul of my beloved brother who went to his world, Le'olamo, his eternity. That's the word Olam Haba. He went to his Olam Haba. So the world to come here is being interpreted as what? For the rabbis of Sanhedrin, the world to come was physical resurrection. For the Yizkor paragraph, my brother is already there. Has my brother been resurrected? Do I need to set another table at the Seder this year? Because he's coming back? No. So here the word olam is being used for what kind of afterlife?
Dwelling with God spiritually.
Spiritual afterlife. Okay? Not physical afterlife, spiritual afterlife. So this, by the time we get to this prayer, which is 1,000 years later than the Mishnah, and is basic to our prayer book, we say that the Olam Haba is spiritual. And we ask that God remember the soul of my brother. Does God forget? Well, how stupid is this? I hope I called you stupid. I didn't mean that. But how can you say God will remember? Like, of course God will remember.
And I hear it more as, in my remembering, God will remember.
But that would be ezkor or nizkor. I will remember or we will remember. This prayer is, He will remember.
Well, in the Bible, when God remembers somebody, He bestows favor.
Give me an example.
And God was mindful of Sarah.
Yes, from the Yom Kippur reading, yes, of Rosh Hashanah reading. And God remembered Sarah and his promise to Abraham, and she was with child at the age of 90. one of my favorite little trivias. So yes, when God remembers somebody, it means he remembers them for good with blessing. So here we're asking for remembering, so we are standing here, Leslie, you're absolutely right, we're standing here and I am declaring that I am remembering this person this day. By the fact that I walked into synagogue on a work day at 9, 10, or 11 in the morning to make sure that I'm here for Yizkor, that's me making a statement that I'm remembering. It's like lighting the yahrzeit candle the night before the yahrzeit. I am remembering. But I want more than that, because after all, I'm going to die. And if I'm the only one who's remembering, and I have this in my family, right, in my larger family, there are yahrzeits that I'm for sure the only one who's remembering. And when I'm gone, it's gone. And I try and give it to my kids, because, you know, whenever it's a yahrzeit for someone one of my kids is named for, I'll bring them to the candle and I'll have them light it, and I'll show them a picture of the person, and I'll say, this is the yahrzeit of your grandpa, and I hope that at school tomorrow when you have minyan, you'll stand for Kaddish. And maybe they will, maybe they won't. Maybe each one of them will own one of these yahrzeits. But not everybody in my family who died got a kid to be named for them. So some of them are going to go when I'm gone. You know, so I will remember, but that's not forever. Me remembering is only just now. He will remember is asking for permanence. And so if we combine that with what Ken said, he will remember as a form of blessing and remembering, protecting. What does that mean?
I interpret when you say this, God remembering. I don't think of remembering like, oh, do you remember that you left your keys in the car? That kind of remembering something you forgot. Not that it was forgotten, but that it was brought up as special mention, like when you're lighting a yahrzeit candle. You're remembering, you didn't forget, obviously.
Right.
You have a special mention.
So everybody knows, for example, that Jerry is the Rabbi of the congregation. Everyone knows this. We know it all the time. We see it all the time. We hear it all the time. We've known Jerry for years. Jerry's the Rabbi of the congregation, right? That's a really important role. And it's not president of the congregation, so he's spared much of the service of being a leader. It's one of the best roles around here, quite frankly. But if I were to stand in the pulpit and say, I just want to take a moment and express gratitude to Jerry, who's been the Rabbi of the congregation for quite some time, and for all he does for us. And Jerry, we value that, and we thank you. Does it mean that we had forgotten up until this point?
It's saying special mention.
It's special mention. So it's really, it's some kind of acknowledgement, admission, but also it adds a certain kind of intensity to it. It gives it a new kind of a life. Now, Jerry's going to be sitting there thinking, is he asking for money? Is he getting ready to fire me? Is he going to give me a plaque? What's going on? Because he's, you know, all that, you know, that could be in play when you do something like that. Here, there is also that downside of, may God remember, because I don't want this person's life and soul and meaning and everything that they were to evaporate. And why do we do that? Because our physical experience is that people evaporate. Go to a cemetery. 99% of those graves are not being thought of today. And 100 years from now, nobody on the face of this earth will know who they were or what they meant. Unless they're a Pulitzer Prize winner or a Nobel Peace Prize or something like that, you go through the cemetery, and if the graves are 2 generations old, who knows who they are? So we know that memory evaporates, and we hope that in the world we've had some ripples in the pond that go on even though they're not attributed to us anymore. We hope that's enough. We hope a lineage of family will go forward with more specific things that were us. We hope that's enough. But really, what did my great-great-great-grandmother like for breakfast? I really know nothing about her. What color was her hair? I have no idea. Eventually. You know, so he will remember is a very powerful thing in the face of death. God is permanent. And in that way, we hope that they will be permanent. That their death will not be the death of the dandelion. It lived, it was beautiful, it withered, it's gone. Right? Okay, so that's the Yizkor paragraph. Now let's look at the El Mole Rachamim, and then we'll take a quick break. Page 196. On the bottom. We won't do the one for the Shoah, we'll do the one on the bottom. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure. Why is that line there? God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure. Why is that there?
Not everyone's going to be.
Because not everybody gets the world to come. That's what's happening in this prayer. There is a line of judgment. Some people get the eternity of the soul, and others don't. We don't know where the line is. How strict is God? That's Yom Kippur. We have no idea how strict God is. You better be as good as you possibly can be and hope that it's enough. Now, again, that starts to ring in people's ears as a non-Jewish thing. That's Christianity threatening you with salvation and you're damned for all time if you don't, da-da-da-da-da. The truth is, the idea of a world to come that has judgment in it, and some are in and some are out, is not a Christian teaching. It's a Jewish teaching. That Christianity turned into a particular flavor as a basis of their religion. But it is a Jewish teaching. That not everybody gets this. And that's what, even with resurrection of the dead, they did. All Israel gets a place in the world to come, except one who says that there's no resurrection of the dead in the Torah. One who says that the Torah is not from heaven. One who denigrates the Torah. Rabbi Akiva says one who reads heretical books or whispers magical incantations over a wound for healing.
Witch doctor.
Okay? So they've got these other categories of people who are Jews but don't get in. So there's judgment. There's some line of judgment. They've given it in some categories so you can be certain these people don't get in. But they don't give you the line of you can be certain these people do get in. We don't know where that is. So among the holy and the pure, may they be among the holy and the pure. That idea is going to come back in our second half, in our second session. It's actually not a half. Where we talk about Kaddish and some of our rituals and what's the point of that. Among all the children, who have gone to their eternal home, we ask that our loved ones find perfect peace in your tender embrace, their memory enduring as an inspiration for commitment to their ideals and integrity in our lives. The Hebrew doesn't say that. That inspiration for commitment to their ideals and integrity in our lives is not in the Hebrew. Jules Harlow, the rabbi who's the editor of this book, that's his theology. It's the theology that Leslie articulated. That they inspire us in their values and teachings to live their values and teachings in our lives. What the Hebrew says is, may they be bound up in the bond of life. Yitzur b'tzur chayim. May they be bound up in the bonds of life. What does that mean? Well, if you're inclined to believe that eternal life is spiritual in the world to come, you think that's what it means. If you don't think that there's a life in the world to come, and there's only this life and we have to take their ideals forward, you think that's what it means. And if you think that it's resurrection of the dead, you think that's what it means. It's a delightful phrase that can mean whatever you think. Of course, some of us are right, and some of us are wrong, and we don't know which ones are which. So the prayer is a beautiful prayer because it actually is usable by all these different people. That's what makes this a powerful prayer. It really does have, but the translation has hedged its bets to a specific interpretation of the phrase, which is why we stay in Hebrew, because it leaves it more possible. And may they rest in peace. Absolutely. May they rest in peace in all time. That their graves not be disturbed, their body not be disturbed, their soul not be tormented. That's it. That's the El Mole prayer. So when we say an El Mole, we're praying for the eternity of the soul in the presence of God, having passed the measure of judgment, and that their life be bound up somehow in life, our life, their life, eternal life, and that be a peaceful and a loving existence. That's what El Mole means. So we've trended away from resurrection of the dead. You do have one thing, and I'll leave it with this, and then we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll do the Shiva House. You have a song, a sing-song, happy clappy song, that teaches resurrection of the dead, that you sing with abandon every year, and you probably have since you were a kid. And it's at the Passover Seder. Anyone know what it is? Chagadia. Chagadia is a resurrection of the dead song. What happens? This kills that. 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 Everything gets killed except God kills death. The angel of death comes and kills the butcher. God comes and kills the angel of death. Didn't that ever seem weird to you? No, because it's a happy clappy song. But it's a theological song about resurrection of the dead, or life in the world to come, whichever belief you're holding, you can hold. So God killing the angel of death is God's victory over death and granting you eternal life. So in our Siddur today, we have conflicting or complementary, however you can work it out, teachings. The Amidah is a core ancient rabbinic teaching that says, Mechayeh HaMetim, God gives life to dead people. That was meant to be physical. In the Amalei Rachamim prayer and the Yizkor prayers, we have a prayer that God should remember and keep and bless in the world to come the spiritual soul of those who have died for all time. You can believe both. They're in the world to come spiritually. Zap, they come back to a new body. Hope it works out well for you. When you die the next time, you're back into the world to come. Right? Maybe you can have both. Maimonides says that Messiah is a political leader, has nothing to do with resurrection or magic or mystery, and that the world to come is spiritual and has everything to do with the soul and only the soul, and resurrection of the dead is a part-time miracle. You live, you'll die again. Be careful. Enjoy it when you get it. That's Maimonides' solution. He separates the three of them out. Anyone who combines them is doing a creative endeavor that is not found as a teaching in core Judaism at the earliest levels. Last question, and then we take a break.
Okay, one more quick question. When you talked about, say, a 2-month-old baby dying,
Yeah.
the soul, is it possible that in that comes the fact that God knows what that child will become and what he's capable of?
Well, the child doesn't become those things. So it's hard for God to know what a child would become when they don't become that.
Right.
Right? In another world, I could have been a diplomat or a scientist, but I'm a rabbi. Right? These are the ideas that I had as a kid growing up. So is there another reality that God knows where I am a diplomat? No. Because that would be knowing something that's not. How can God know something that's not? Right? So I prefer the idea that the soul is unstained by negative experience, winds up in the world to come, and in the presence of God sees and knows everything that God knows and sees. I think people continue to be aware of us through God's eyes after they've died in the world to come. But if you're not in the world to come, and there seems to be a thing, then what do they get? I don't believe in a hell and a torment and all that stuff. I think they die the death of the dandelion. I think bad people get nothing. And I think good people get everything. That's my belief. And I think it's grounded in the texts, and it's the one that comes out the best after trying to apply reason and logic to things that are not reasonable or logical. And we're going to take a break. I said we're going to do one more and take a break.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I've run over. So 5-minute break. I'll take your question privately.
He's done.
You're done.
He's still on break.
Oh, what happens to
We're on
a
break.
person? What happens to a break? Somebody should die, and they get